Now, let's talk more about networks. Like I said, most logic runs on the server. I made it sound like clients process almost nothing, but there are exceptions. Again, with the illustration, let's say we have a server here, always blue. So there are a server and multiple clients here, clients and clients. Okay, and an entity pops out here in the server entity. So in ordinary situations, all clients should get this entity at the same time. Here. Now, there may be an entity you only want them to exist within a client, right? So the best example of this is the UI. The UI is a type of entity, UI. And the UI is by default a local entity. It's local. Why is it local? Let's say we're playing a game, and if I open my character stats on screen, it would be weird for other players to see the same screen on their UI. So like my items, my potion, my heart, and other stuff. If I want to check them, and whenever I press them, if the other players get to see it, it's a bit weird. So um, you wouldn't expect that other players' HP bar, the health bar, being getting dropped when my character gets hit by a monster. So that's why the UI is locally managed in the client. I just mentioned character sets, and this is something that changes depending on the usage of UI by a player. That's why the inputs are also often local in addition to UI. So inputs also are local. Let's say I press my button to use a skill, and I press the key A in the keyboard, and you don't want the other characters acting like they just pressed A. So the UI and the input here commands are two primary examples of logic that should be local to the client. And because of that, they are an exception to most of the programming running in the game. And these two don't exist on the server, by the way. So they don't exist in the server here. You're supposed to manage them on your own. I can control what inputs I put in, and I control and get to see things on my UI. And there are some more logic types that are local to the client. Effect is another example. So let's say there's an explosion effect on your game and all those like explosion and stuff. So this explosion event in the world will be displayed to characters passing by and who got hit. So everyone should be able to have access to the information about the same event. So most effects are still controlled by the server, and effects are one of the entities on the server. If it's created in the server, it will be created in all the clients as usual. But sometimes I want this effect to show only for a certain client. That's when I decide to make it local. So in that case, I want the effect to be controlled only on the client. And I'll do that by making this effect as a local entity. So in short, the client processes the input and UI. And the client also might run additional logic to help optimization. So when you want to show like visual effects to only the client here, client A, it will actually cost a lot to show the same thing to other clients. So I'm going to make this as a local entity. So that's what optimization is. You can just use some of the client's logic to enable this detailed controls. You might also want to use parameters for execution space control. Here, I can add ha 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 and add a parameter here. I'm going to make it as a string because I want to add something ha 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 like that. Okay, I'm going to print client dot argument 1. Okay, let's go for it. All you have to do is just write in the parameters, and MSW will do the rest for you. See? Very simple, right? You don't have to manually control a whole lot. This was to run on the client, but the server here printed this out. So you see, MSW sends the arguments or parameters automatically. Here, this was to be run on the client, but it automatically sent it to the server, and now you got what you want. So that's that. And these things did not happen before I wrote wait2, waiting for 2 seconds. So there's something you have to be aware when building your client-server structure. And basically, the server runs while the client opens. So the entities are created in the server, then in the clients. This create comment is sent after the entity has been created in the server. So entity is created first, and then this message, this create comment is sent. So what will happen if the server sends the packet here, packet, to the client in the middle of this client creating the entity? So I mean, before the entity is created, if the client receives the packet, they won't have an entity to receive the packet. So even if you run begin play, the server will create the entity for itself, but then the client will not be prepared. So it was impossible for them to print out the logs inside here. So I mean, it could have already created the entity, but it also might not have. So we don't know the exact timing when the client will have its entity. So that's why the timing issues I mentioned earlier can become a problem. So now that covers what property, function, and execution space controls are. It'll be confusing at first, but please try to understand more, and it will be much easier if you try it on your own and repeat it again and again. And I recommend you to just write the logic for the server until you gain more proficiency. It would be easier and there wouldn't be errors as much. So now I've mentioned the inputs in UI, so let's finally take a look at an example of the local UI and the input logic.